Hello and welcome. You're watching India's Voice to the World, DD India. I'm Gautam Roy. Now, over the next 1 hour, we'll be taking you through the key moments and takeaways from India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi's just concluded 3-day US visit, where he not only held bilateral talks with President Joe Biden and attended the 4th Quad Summit, but also addressed the United Nations Summit of the Future, connected with the Indian Diaspora, and held around half a dozen other bilateral meetings, which included leaders of Nepal, Ukraine, Palestine, and many others. Prime Minister Modi will be landing home shortly after wrapping up a successful 3-day visit to the United States. His visit to the US was action-packed with significant events, including a bilateral meeting with President Joe Biden at his Delaware residence, the Quad Leaders Summit, and he also addressed the Summit of the Future at the United Nations, making this trip a decisive step in strengthening India's global partnerships and influence. And DD India Shubhendu Ghosh has sent us this report from New York about the PM's US visit.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi concluded his historic visit to the United States in a packed tour that lasted around 50 hours. India's vision and engagement was furthered in diverse domains. First, the Quad Leader Summit. Prime Minister Modi participated in the 6th Quad Leader Summit in Wilmington, Delaware, hosted by US President Joe Biden. Leaders of Australia and Japan also participated. Some of the big takeaways included the Quad Cancer Moonshot, a groundbreaking partnership to save lives in the Indo-Pacific region by combating cervical cancer, first ever Quad at Sea ship observer mission, cooperation in semiconductor supply chain, and more. The next Leader Summit will be hosted by India in 2025. Second, the Summit of the Future. PM Modi addressed the Summit of the Future at the 79th United Nations General Assembly in New York. He gave a clarion call for reform, saying that global action must match global ambitions. His intervention defined the fundamental course correction needed for a sustainable and equitable future. He flagged the continuing threat of terrorism and cybercrimes, advocated strengthening global digital governance and tech regulation. He also shared India's success in poverty alleviation and digital public infrastructure. Third, the bilateral engagements. On the sidelines of the key events, Prime Minister held a number of bilateral meetings. Besides the Quad partner countries, PM also met leaders of Nepal, Kuwait, Palestine, Vietnam, Armenia, and Ukraine. PM Modi and President Zelensky discussed the situation in Ukraine, as well as ways to forward on the pursuing a path of peace, figured prominently in their discussions. Next, the CEO's Roundtable. Prime Minister Modi interacted with technology industry leaders in New York in a roundtable anchored by Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Talks focused on artificial intelligence, quantum, biotechnology, life sciences, computing, IT and communication, along with semiconductor technologies. Finally, the mega Diaspora program. Indian American community accorded a memorable welcome to Prime Minister Modi at the Nassau Coliseum at Long Island. The Prime Minister recounted the remarkable rise of India and the Indian diaspora on the global stage. He also said that for the world, AI stands for artificial intelligence, but he believes it also represents the America-India spirit. So those were some of the key takeaways of Prime Minister Modi's historic visit to the United States. Shubhendu Ghosh for DD India in New York.
Now, as Shubhendu mentioned, Prime Minister Modi addressed the Summit of the Future at the United Nations in New York on the 3rd and final day of his visit, calling for the primacy of a human-centric approach in the collective quest for a bright global future. The PM highlighted India's success at pursuing sustainable development initiatives. He also called for urgent reform of the institutions of global governance, including the United Nations Security Council.
Global action must match global ambition.
The statement by India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi defines the fundamental course correction needed for a sustainable and equitable future. Prime Minister Modi arrived at the 79th UN General Assembly session to address the Summit of the Future in New York. Prime Minister said reforms are the only way forward for global peace and development.
वैश्विक शांति एवं विकास के लिए ग्लोबल संस्थाओं में रिफॉर्म्स आवश्यक है. रिफॉर्म इज द की टू रिलेवेंस.
Apart from reform of multilateral institutions and the global governance architecture, the Prime Minister strongly reiterated India's long-standing position that resolution to global conflicts can only be brought about by engaging in dialogue, sitting across the table and not on the battlefield.
सक्सेस का हमारा यह अनुभव हम ग्लोबल साउथ के साथ साझा करने के लिए तैयार है.
Prime Minister said the world must prioritize a human-centric approach. He flagged the continuing threat of terrorism and cybercrimes and advocated strengthening the global digital governance and tech regulation. He also gave an example of how India successfully lifted 250 million people out of poverty. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his address, underlined the key threats and opportunities in the path towards sustainable future. And with its remarkable achievements in poverty alleviation and advances in digital public infrastructure, Prime Minister emphasized that India can show the way. With my colleague Amritpal Singh and camera person Sanjay Jaina, Shubhendu Ghosh for DD India at UN headquarters in New York.
With what we've shown you so far, we've only scratched the surface of all that happened during the 3 days Prime Minister Modi visited the US. Let's now dive deeper into it. To talk about it, we have with us Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya, former Secretary MEA and former Indian Ambassador to Switzerland as well as Turkey. We're also joined by Professor Arvind Kumar, Center for Canadian, US and Latin American Studies at the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome to you both. Ambassador Bhattacharya, if I could ask you first, in terms of how Prime Minister Modi had a varied set of engagements at the bilateral, plurilateral and multilateral level, how do you look at in terms of how he pursued India's multiple interests while he was there in the US, engaging at the kind of levels that he did through the course of these 3 days?
Thank you for inviting us. I think Prime Minister Modi focused on the three key aspects that his visit was trying to address. The first was the bilateral engagement with the United States, which is a very principal partner of India in this new era as we move towards the future. And in that, the meeting with President Biden was very significant, and also the engagement with the CEOs and with the Indian diaspora. The second element for which he was there was something that actually is something that is of the emerging global geopolitics, which is the Indo-Pacific and the Quad, which is an essential element of that. And the Quad leaders meeting, which was hosted by President Biden, was something that Prime Minister contributed to. And I think in this particular Quad meeting, they came out with a very, very substantive document which outlines the very broad agenda that the Quad has set out. And I think for the first time, it also spells out the kinds of actions, particularly in the security domain, in addition to all the other areas. And the third element of his visit was to New York, where he addressed the Future Summit, so that the UN and its related multilateral organizations can make themselves relevant in today's contemporary context. Because while the UN reflects the realities of the post-Second World War of the 1945 era, what it does not fully represent are the changes that have happened and the aspirations and hopes of the developing world of the global South. And I think Prime Minister emphasized that very, very eloquently.
Certainly. Now, Professor Arvind Kumar, if I were to ask you about this Summit of the Future, according to you, did Prime Minister Modi put out the concerns, of course, of the Global South? That is pretty much certain. But apart from, all the others who spoke over there in the course of the summit, do you think that Prime Minister Modi brought to this event a uniquely Indian perspective as well, which the world could then take forward?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Let me say that despite Prime Minister's address at the United Nations, the Summit of the Future was brief and short, but it sent a lot of good messages for the rest of the world. The first which he had put the emphasis was on sustainable living. And that is something that speaks volume about India's intent in addressing the larger global problem. The second thing which he talks about, and that is again very critical in the current context, especially when the world is ridden by conflict and war, when he talked about that now the time has come that we should look into the major aspect of policy, that is multilateralism, and how that could be central to the larger aspect of the growing problem in the world. So multilateralism, again, he emphasized. And the third thing which he again was talking about was about how best because of the changing nature of the world, how best the UN itself should get reformed. And that was the emphasis that how the reforms of mechanism should really be done as soon as possible. I think these three key points, the takeaways from Prime Minister Modi's very short and brief address at the United Nations.
Yes, certainly. And Ambassador Bhattacharya, in terms of giving India's own example to showcase or show to the world, through kind of a demonstration, a QED, as to how things can be transformed, do you think Prime Minister Modi gave something of value to the other attendees as well as to what could be done in tackling a multiple nature of problems in different parts of the world?
Oh, absolutely. Because I think what has emerged over the last decade or so is that the example of India has come out not only as an economy that is growing in a very robust manner, but also one that is addressing the needs of its citizens and also engaging with the global community. The one world, one family concept and the one future that was advanced during our G20 presidency was something that is actually of a wider, deeper philosophical context. In very specific terms, Prime Minister at the United Nations highlighted the very important role of technology and in particular of the digital public infrastructure that India has created, the GAM Trinity, which now enables access to the multitude of millions of people and provides them in a transparent manner seamlessly in order to alleviate their poverty, in order to provide them with opportunities of jobs, employment, all of enterprise, and in a manner so that the efficiencies of transactions are also increased. And this is something, the UPI that we have evolved, is now something that is being incorporated and adopted by countries across. The example that Prime Minister gave of lifting 250 million people out of poverty is another striking example of how India has managed and how in today's world where food security has become a very important area of concern, particularly when we have conflict situations as we do in Ukraine and Gaza, then how do we address these particular concerns? And so I think Prime Minister was giving specific examples and then urging the global community to accept that reform is the key to relevance, and therefore the UN and other multilateral structures do that. Similarly, I think in some of his bilateral meetings as well, the meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine was one in which I think, the initiative that was taken up with Prime Minister's visits to Moscow and Kyiv, and now with meeting Putin, with meeting Zelensky again, I think the importance of trying to have diplomatic, negotiated solutions rather than solutions on the battlefield is something that the 21st century must embrace, because human beings have evolved, and can we not evolve the ways in which we resolve our issues? I think India way, so to say, was being exposed by Prime Minister in many, many different examples.
Prime Minister Modi, a call really Prime Minister Modi gave at the Future Summit was global action must match global ambition, and that is also being done through the Quad, which happened on Saturday. Prime Minister Modi participated in the 4th Quad Leaders Summit, at Wilmington in the U.S. state of Delaware. This is the fourth physical in-person summit. This place, of course, is the home to President Biden as well. Now, the PM said that the Quad stands for quick, unified assistance delivery. He underlined the need for this area to cater to the Indo-Pacific as well. And the leaders, the Quad other leaders, also appreciated Prime Minister Modi's leadership in the Indian Ocean region. And President Biden said that the U.S. has things to learn from India's experience and leadership in the Indian Ocean.
The Quad has become a pivotal force in shaping shifting geopolitical dynamics. Amid global tensions and conflicts, the alliance comprising India, the US, Japan and Australia convened in Wilmington, Delaware. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi highlighted the Indo-Pacific inclusivity and prosperity as a shared priority, with a clear message that the cooperation of the nations is important for humanity, given the current world order. He also thanked President Biden for expanding cooperation across critical areas like health, technology and climate change.
Free, open, inclusive और prosperous Indo-Pacific हमारी साझा प्राथमिकता और साझा प्रतिबद्धता है। हमने मिलकर हेल्थ सिक्योरिटी, critical and emerging technologies, climate change, capacity building जैसे क्षेत्रों में कई सकारात्मक और समावेशी इनिशिएटिव लिए हैं।
PM Modi also asserted that the Quad was not against anyone and it supported rules-based international order.
हमारी बैठक ऐसे समय हो रही है जब विश्व तनावों और संघर्षों से घिरा हुआ है। ऐसे में साझा डेमोक्रेटिक वैल्यूज के आधार पर क्वाड का मिलकर साथ चलना पूरी मानवता के लिए बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है। हम किसी के खिलाफ नहीं हैं। हम सभी एक रूल्स बेस्ड इंटरनेशनल ऑर्डर, संप्रभुता और क्षेत्रीय अखंडता के सम्मान और सभी मसलों के शांतिपूर्ण ढंग से हल निकालने का समर्थन करते हैं।
US President Joe Biden echoed this sentiment, affirming that the Quad is more aligned than ever, announcing new initiatives.
Today, we're announcing a series of initiatives to deliver real, positive impact for the Indo-Pacific. That includes providing new maritime technologies to our regional partners so they know what's happening in their waters, launching cooperation between coast guards for the first time, and expanding the Quad Fellowship to include students from Southeast Asia.
Japanese PM and his Australian counterpart further stressed on the need of an institution like Quad that plays a crucial role in strengthening security and peace in the region. They called Quad to work together for a more secure and open international order.
It is ever more important for us, the Quad, who share values such as freedom and democracy, to continue to demonstrate our firm commitment to our common vision of FOIP, the free and open Indo-Pacific, to the international community.
Partnerships like the Quad are crucial, providing us with an avenue to discuss shared responsibilities and goals and strengthening the enduring relationships necessary for lasting stability.
In an ever-evolving world, the Quad's commitment to a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific is crucial for the future of global stability and cooperation. With Amritpal Singh in the United States, Bureau Report, DD India.
And my colleague Shubhendu Ghosh is joining us live now from New York for more on this. Shubhendu, we've already got that report from you kind of telling us as to what all happened through the course of the 3 days. But if you look at what happened during the course of the Quad Summit, it just tells you how things have been evolving with this partnership between these four nations. It's going into areas that perhaps were never thought that would be explored. curing, the quest to cure cancer is not part of it as well. When the pandemic happened, it was a pandemic. And apart from that, ensuring that the Indo-Pacific remains a region that has rule of law, there's navigation, freedom of navigation for everyone, and everyone prospers together.
Absolutely, Gautam. Good morning to you from here in New York. It's a remarkable evolution that the Quad grouping has witnessed. It's been nearly 2 decades of Quad since its origin, but we have to see that the past 6-7 years were particularly active and consequential. And this edition of the Quad Summit, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi sat alongside leaders of United States, Japan and Australia, we see an expansion in its objectives in a manner that we have not seen earlier. Of course, there were working groups, but now we see more action-oriented, targeted interventions by the group. It has also interestingly expanded many folds beyond its immediate strategic and security priority in the Indo-Pacific. As you mentioned, the health intervention is very, very significant. The Cancer Moonshot Initiative is going to pool in the best resources, talent, technology that is there in these 4 Quad countries. And it is almost reminiscent of the pandemic emergency when these countries had come together with their respective expertise. One provided the finances, the other was a leader, India was a leader in vaccine manufacturing, then Australia in supply chain and so on. So that model is a tested model, and it is now going to be applied on something like cancer treatment and intervention, and the implications could be unimaginably positive for the world, particularly for the Indo-Pacific, given that it's disproportionately impacted by the calamity. Yet the security aspect continues to remain an important part of the Quad grouping. We see more closer engagement in the waters of the Indo-Pacific. There are different initiatives introduced also to monitor the waters of the Indo-Pacific. It is aimed at cooperation. It is aimed at keeping the region free and secure. Prime Minister in his intervention had categorically, it's really a reiteration when he says that the Quad grouping is not against anyone. It is not a coming together of nations against any one or more nations. It is a coming together of like-minded countries to make sure that the entire region, which is not just about 4 countries, by the way, there are so many Indo-Pacific nations, poorer nations, developing nations, whose priorities resonate with what the Quad seeks to do. Gautam?
Yes, certainly, Shubhendu. Just stay with us. Professor Arvind Kumar, if I could come to you. If you look at what the commentariat had to say after this Quad meeting and the statements that were put out, there was a lot of comment about the fact that the statement has been very forthright about how things have been going in the Indo-Pacific in terms of the kind of aggression that China has shown, although China is never named in this particular statement, but the language used was pretty forthright. So how does that change the situation on the ground, keeping in mind also the kind of initiatives that have also been now taken or will be put into effect to ensure that the policing of the region, particularly in the maritime zone, is tightened further?
Challenges associated with Quad formation are being dispelled out. I think it is no more initiative which is going to counter China. This is what the message which has come from the larger declaration which has been issued at Wilmington. And India has taken the lead in terms of dispelling that fear and the doubt, especially in China's mind. The United States, in particular, is obviously showing a lot of, some sort of conviction that if Indo-Pacific has to become open and obviously free and obviously this rule-based, China certainly has to come under that ambit. And how best these countries can bring China under the ambit of rule-based order in Indo-Pacific remains a part of the challenge. India's emphasis certainly was on rule-based international order. India's emphasis was on how best the nation could protect their sovereignty, how best the nation could protect
how things have been moved along, not just in terms of how strong the language has been about the kind of aggressive moves that have been made by China in recent months, really, as far as the Indo-Pacific region is concerned, with the Philippines and others. even the kind of initiatives when it comes to ensuring that not just the navies and other forces of these countries coordinate better in the region, in the oceans as well as elsewhere, but also in terms of how they can come together, even the coast guards can come together and work together?
I think the maritime domain awareness that is perhaps reflected.
I'm sorry, I was asking Ambassador Bhattacharya.
Right. I think one of the major things that the Indo-Pacific Initiative is trying to do is to bring about a brighter future for that entire region. And in fact, the understanding of a free, open, rule-based system, which is also inclusive, is extremely important. Now, obviously, the reality is that certain countries, certain reservations about the Indo-Pacific idea. And it is understandable because, the rule-based system perhaps does not appeal to them as much. But I think the common understanding, and now we have a number of approaches which have come out from across the world, not just in the Indo-Pacific region, but even far away, which are talking of the future being of the Indo-Pacific in that region. So I think what India had tried to do right from the outset was to make sure that the primary focus of the Indo-Pacific and Quad should not just be security, because we live in a very complex world, and therefore we need to look at the aspects of peace and security, certainly, but we equally need to look at the issues of progress and development. We also need to look at the issues of sustainability, climate change. We also need to look at some of the issues that are very relevant to this area. For instance, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and health and so on. And I think what India and its efforts of the other Quad partners has been able to do is at this particular leaders summit, we've come up with a document which not only delineates all the achievements of the various working groups, but actually sets out a plan of action as to how to go ahead. And I think that is perhaps a very significant aspect of this particular development. It is very important to recognize that a hegemonic attitude should not be tolerated. The freedom of navigation, of passage in the seas should be permitted. It is also understandable that, UNCLOS, which has been a basis that all countries have accepted, should be seen as the basis on which territorial disputes in the maritime domain in particular should be resolved. And so this is an urging to the community that you have mechanisms available. And now it is our time to go ahead and do that. And so I think the message in the Quad statement and the declaration coming out of Wilmington was extremely important, because it not only sets the stage for how we can actually go ahead, but it says that the mechanisms are now being put into place.
Yes, certainly, and it stands quite distinctly if you look at what AUKUS what has been done through AUKUS, where the military aspect with the nuclear submarines for Australia is pretty front-loaded and in your face. So there's a contrast there with Quad as well. I'll request you to stay on with us. We've still got more to talk about as far as this trip is concerned, and still to come on this special show. India and US decide to set up together a first-of-its-kind semiconductor fab unit focused on security, next-generation telecom and green energy applications.
Geopolitics and trade deals. Economic challenges amid development. Hard work and the path to prosperity. It's the economy, always. Between walkers, money is what money does and says. Supply creates its own demand. Between the bulls pulls and bears tears. When supply chains globalization and India rises to the podium. We'll get you centered with the Economic Brief at 8 p.m. every Thursday on DD India.
Complex issues, hidden agendas, twists and turns, strategic games. We think all dots are linked. We just need to connect them. Join me every week as I connect the dots to unravel hidden designs in statecraft, mysteries, and decode issues that
Welcome back. You're watching DD India's special show, PM Modi's US visit. I'm Gautam Roy. Now, during this trip, it also emerged that India and the US have agreed to establish a new semiconductor fabrication plant focused on advanced sensing, communication and power electronics for national security, next generation telecom and green energy applications. This is the first ever India-US semiconductor fab cooperation of its kind. More in this report.
US President Joe Biden and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi hailed a watershed arrangement to establish a new semiconductor fabrication plant focused on advanced sensing, communication and power electronics for national security, next generation telecommunications and green energy applications. The fab will be enabled by support from the India Semiconductor Mission as well as a strategic technology partnership between Bharat Semi, Third iTech and the US Space Force. Some of the key highlights are, this is the first ever India-US semiconductor fab cooperation of its kind. It's the first time ever the US military has agreed to do a technology partnership for these highly valued technologies with India, hence making it a watershed moment as powerful as the civil nuclear deal. The fab becomes not only India's first, but also one of the world's first multi-material fab for national security. The Bharat Semi fab, titled Shakti, also becomes one of the first fabs of its kind in the Quad. The fab will focus on three essential pillars for the modern war fighting: advanced sensing, advanced communications, and high voltage power electronics. These three areas also have huge growing needs for commercial sectors such as railways, telecom infrastructure and data centers and green energy. These semiconductors fall under a family known as compound semiconductors. Three main tech areas include infrared, gallium nitride, and silicon carbide. It's part of PM Modi's vision for India to become a chip maker from a chip taker. This fab becomes a national asset and further helps India's goals of becoming a net security provider in the region. This is a glass ceiling broken in tech diplomacy and years down the road will go down in history books as a watershed moment in India-US relationships. India's current import bill in these semiconductors for national security alone is $1 billion a year. This becomes the first true India-US semiconductor fab project. Other projects in the past have included testing and assembly OSAT. But this is raising the game and going into true chip fabrication, the holy grail of semiconductors.
भारत चाहता है दुनिया में ज्यादा से ज्यादा डिवाइस मेड इन इंडिया चिप पर चलें। हमने सेमीकंडक्टर सेक्टर को भी भारत की तेज ग्रोथ का आधार बनाया है। पिछले साल जून में भारत ने सेमीकंडक्टर सेक्टर के लिए इंसेंटिव घोषित किए थे। इसके कुछ ही महीनों बाद माइक्रोन की पहली सेमीकंडक्टर यूनिट का शिलान्यास भी हो गया।
After this tech partnership, India will join a handful of elite nations with the capability and know-how to manufacture these types of semiconductors on shore. Bureau Report, DD India.
Apart from our guests, I still have with me my colleague Shubhendu Ghosh live with us from New York. Shubhendu, just tell us in terms of how India intends to be, it has the ambition to become a global semiconductor hub. How critical is this sort of a partnership where it's not just an American company, an Indian company together, but it's the governments, their bodies. There will be technology transfer as well. So just tell us, I mean, it's been described as watershed in any case, but sort of expand on it a bit and where exactly will it come up and how soon it will be put into action.
Truly, what is extraordinary about partnership in the semiconductor domain, Gautam, is that we have to understand it is not just about any technology and advancing in that sector. It is the kind of strategic significance that semiconductor and these emerging technologies have, the kind of bearing they have on the days ahead in the future. The countries, the supply chains that are established now are going to determine the manner in which world order takes shape in the decades ahead. In that sense, Prime Minister's visit, this particular visit to the United States, has been quite remarkable in many takeaways. As far as the semiconductor and the focus on technology cooperation is concerned, we saw it took center stage in the Quad grouping of the leaders from India, Japan, Australia, and the United States. Then there was a short but a very, very significant roundtable meet that Prime Minister had with technology CEOs, industry leaders from India and America. And that cooperation speaks volumes about the kind of groundwork that is being done, not just in India, where the idea of manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing is picking up, the very first bricks are being laid, but also to really strengthen the global supply chain and position India as an important partner in that domain. So we see that there is a strong strategic aspect to strengthening the semiconductor supply chain, and work is happening at various levels, which is exciting. At the leaders level, taking forward the cooperation, but also on the ground. In India, we know that there are more than 2 to 3 mega semiconductor plants that are coming up. Australia, remember, is the supplier of key minerals, the essential minerals required to manufacture these semiconductors. So already there is a framework emerging wherein the best expertise that these nations have, including India, are going to be put to use to reimagine and realign the semiconductor and emerging technology supply chain. Gautam?
Certainly, and this will be critical to India's ambition to also become an exporter of defense equipment instead of being the world's largest importer. Very critical technology being shared, and of course there will be other exchanges as well between the Quad nations to make this plant come to fruition and then into action, supplying semiconductors for a lot of defense and other critical equipment. Thanks a lot for joining us from New York, Shubhendu. And also during his visit to the US, Prime Minister Modi held several key bilateral meetings. On the first day of his visit, Prime Minister Modi met with US President Joe Biden at his home in Wilmington. The PM expressed gratitude for President Biden's role in revitalizing the US-India alliance, recalling their recent visits. And PM Modi also held meetings with Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, marking a decade of the India-Japan Special Strategic Partnership. And Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese discussed areas of mutual cooperation from defence to climate change with Prime Minister Modi as well. On the second day, Prime Minister Modi met Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. India and Nepal being key neighbours, the leaders reviewed the strong India-Nepal partnership, highlighting progress in sectors like hydropower and connectivity. Prime Minister Modi also met Kuwait's Crown Prince Sheikh Sabah, emphasizing the importance of India-Kuwait ties. And India's PM also met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, expressing concern over the Gaza crisis. Prime Minister Modi reaffirmed India's support for Palestine, calling for a ceasefire and a return to dialogue and diplomacy. Also on the last day of his visit, Prime Minister Modi held a bilateral meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of the Summit of the Future in New York. The two leaders recalled Prime Minister Modi's recent visit to Ukraine and expressed satisfaction at the continued consolidation of bilateral ties. The situation in Ukraine, as well as the way forward on pursuing a path to peace, also figured prominently in their discussions. The PM reiterated India's clear, consistent and constructive approach in favour of a peaceful resolution of the conflict through diplomacy and dialogue, as well as engagement between all stakeholders. He also conveyed that India remains open to providing all support within its means to facilitate a lasting and peaceful resolution of the conflict. This was the third meeting between the two leaders over the last 3 months. So some of the key bilateral meetings that Prime Minister Modi had during the course of his US visit, primarily most of them taking place in New York. We have our guests with us, Ambassador Bhattacharya and also Professor Kumar. Ambassador Bhattacharya, what do you make of how Prime Minister Modi made use of his time in terms of expanding India's ties or taking them forward, at least with these key partners in New York?
Well, actually, the meetings in New York covered a wide range of key countries with whom we are launching into various initiatives. So as you see, in the Gulf region, there was Kuwait. We had Nepal, which is our immediate neighbor and one of our closest partners. And we had the Palestinian leader, where the Gaza conflict is going on, where India has maintained a very principled position and called for the settlement at an early date, and of course with the Ukrainian president. Look, in these multilateral events where you have the ability and the opportunity to meet with a range of leaders who might be visiting at that point of time, Prime Minister has always sought out the opportunity to try and maximize it so that we can advance our bilateral interests and support the global initiatives and the regional initiatives that we are invested in. And I think Prime Minister has really focused on that.
Certainly. And Professor Kumar, if you'd like to add something to that in terms of how things really work in New York at the time of the UNGA, when, of course, there are a lot of leaders present at that one place where they come to interact with the rest of the world, put across what they think about global issues, but they have to squeeze out time, really. So it also depends on not just who you're interested in meeting, want to take your relations forward with, what really works out at the end of the day.
I think India's approach has been reflected that how best it could assume the responsibility to lead the global affairs. That was reflected, that is one. Second is one-on-one meeting with the Quad leaders was very important to understand the larger perception, especially in terms of how the rest of the world specifically has been confronting with a lot of issues. So as you see, the global issues and the regional issues, these two basically primarily featured in most of the debates and discussions. Meeting with other leaders, such as the leader from Nepal, the Prime Minister of Nepal, and also he met the Crown Prince of Kuwait. All this reflected that how India was interested in, obviously, understanding their perception on many of these global issues. India basically is now in the forefront of finding the solution to many of the global problems. And that is what India has been doing, largely in the context of all the interactions which India had, which the Prime Minister had, with the Quad leaders and many of the leaders who basically came for the UNGA summit.
Certainly. Let me just tell our viewers that Prime Minister Modi also met other world leaders, including Vietnamese President, Armenian President and Secretary of State of the Holy See as well. Prime Minister Modi and Vietnam's President To Lam took stock of the full range of India-Vietnam friendship. The two leaders deliberated upon ways to enhance comprehensive strategic partnership, strengthen bilateral cooperation as well as exchange views on important regional and global issues. They also reaffirmed the importance of deep civilizational and cultural links between the two countries. And the day also saw Prime Minister Modi meeting Armenian counterpart Nikol Pashinyan on the sidelines of the Summit of the Future. And as I briefly mentioned, the PM also interacted with Secretary of State of the Holy See, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. The Holy See is the central government of the Catholic Church and is headquartered in Vatican City State. And still to come on the special show, Prime Minister Modi gets a rousing reception from a packed house of thousands of admirers from the Indian community in New York.
Singapore.
Welcome back. You're watching a special show, Prime Minister Modi's USA visit. Now, PM Modi attended and addressed a community program at NASA Coliseum in New York, as well as part of his 3 days there in the US. An electrifying gathering of over 16,000 people gave the Prime Minister a warm and resounding welcome. Prime Minister Modi highlighted India's resolve to become Viksit Bharat, a developed nation by 2047, and the invaluable role the Indian diaspora plays in cementing bilateral ties with the US.
A leader and his ecstatic admirers, rise of India on the global stage, celebration of India and Indian diaspora. It was a historic day for the Indian diaspora members in Nassau County in New York, as they accorded a memorable welcome to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Nassau Coliseum reverberated with thundering applause on several occasions as Prime Minister Modi recounted the remarkable rise of India and the Indian diaspora on the global stage. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said, "India is now the land of opportunities. It doesn't wait for opportunities anymore. In fact, it creates them."
भारत आज लैंड ऑफ अपॉर्चुनिटीज है, अवसरों की धरती है। अब भारत अवसरों का इंतजार नहीं करता, अब भारत अवसरों का निर्माण करता है।
Prime Minister spoke about his vision for India's future, calling his vision Pushp, which means flower, defining each letter of the word as a path to progress and prosperity of the nation.
आपको एक शब्द याद रहेगा, पुष्प। हाँ, कमल मान लीजिए, मुझे इतराज नहीं है। पुष्प, और मैं पुष्प को डिफाइन करता हूं, P फॉर प्रोग्रेसिव भारत, U फॉर अनस्टॉपेबल भारत, S फॉर स्पिरिचुअल भारत, H फॉर ह्यूमैनिटी फर्स्ट को समर्पित भारत, P फॉर प्रोस्परस भारत, यानी Pushpa.
The Indian Prime Minister also said that for the world, AI stands for artificial intelligence, but he believes AI also represents the America-India spirit.
मैं मानता हूं कि AI का मतलब है अमेरिकन इंडियन। अमेरिका इंडिया ये स्पिरिट है, और वही तो नई दुनिया का AI पावर है।
Modi Enas program was attended by some 15,000 Indian American diaspora from across the United States. A mini India was created in the stadium as performers showcased the cultural diversity of India amidst jubilant audience members. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi listed the great achievements by India in the recent years, he also presented a picture of what kind of power does India aspire to be in the future, not the one that conquers, but the one that inspires. With camera person Sumit Naudiyal, Shubhendu Ghosh for DD India in New York.
Let me now take you back to my guests, Ambassador Sanjay Bhattacharya as well as Professor Kumar. Ambassador Bhattacharya, this has become a consistent part of Prime Minister Modi's visits abroad. Wherever he goes, he connects with the Indian diaspora. He's done that multiple times in the US itself. And that is something that really stands out. How does it really extend the kind of influence that India wields around the world through this instrument of the Indian diaspora? When Prime Minister Modi connects with him, do those countries also feel that India is at the forefront of a lot of activity that is good for the world, and that it is leveraging that strength as well to the full?
Well, Prime Minister has really leveraged the power of the Indian diaspora very effectively. The Indian diaspora is rather unique because it not only represents the best of India wherever it goes, but wherever it goes, and in America in particular, it has been a very shiny example of a very industrious, educated, contributing to the national economy of the Americas. And so it's something that is very highly valued. So the diaspora, or the Pravasi as we call them, are highly valued back in India as well. And it's been the Prime Minister's objective to integrate them into the national development effort as well. Today, India is in a very unique situation where the transformation of India towards a global power is happening at a very rapid pace. But it's also one that is a global power with a very unique Indian set of values. And I think that's what Prime Minister came out when he mentioned it to them, that it is a land of opportunity. And remember, just before this meeting, Prime Minister had a very fruitful session with the business community, which was, in AI and quantum and, semiconductors and so on. And then he comes and meets community where he tells them that that is the future of India that is coming about. And so it is your land of opportunity. And then he also reminds them of their cultural moorings or the deep civilizational background that we have, so that the sense of India is not something that comes back to India alone, but something that enriches the countries where these people live, in the United States or wherever else Prime Minister meets them. And I think this is a very powerful message, because if we are to see this change in the world, to change global governance, to change the way institutions work, to bring about a new set of values and principles so that you don't have an era of war, but actually of negotiation, then we need these values. And I think Prime Minister tries and uses as many of these levers as possible, including the diaspora, to that effect.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. We completely run out of time. Ambassador Bhattacharya and Professor Kumar, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this visit that Prime Minister Modi had, a very successful one, to the United States. Now, just as a final thought, after having wrapped up all his engagements in the US, Prime Minister Modi himself put out a video on X with an accompanying text saying this has been a fruitful US visit, covering diverse programs and focusing on a series of subjects aimed at making our planet better. Take a look, and thanks for watching the show.
प्रेसिडेंट बाइडेन मुझे डेलावेयर में अपने घर ले गए थे। उनकी आत्मीयता, उनकी गर्मजोशी मेरे लिए दिल छू लेने वाला मोमेंट रहा। मेरे तीसरे कार्यकाल के शुरुआत में ही क्वाड समिट में मित्रों के साथ भाग लेते हुए मुझे बहुत खुशी हो रही है।
Mr. President, will the Quad survive beyond the election in November? The Quad, will it survive regardless of the outcome?
हमारा मैसेज साफ है, क्वाड इज हियर टू स्टे, टू असिस्ट, टू पार्टनर एंड टू कॉम्प्लीमेंट। भारत का विजन है वन अर्थ वन हेल्थ। इसी भावना से मैं क्वाड मूनशॉट इनिशिएटिव के तहत $7.5 मिलियन के सैपलिंग किट्स, डिटेक्शन किट्स और वैक्सीन का सहयोग देने की घोषणा करता हूँ। डेमोक्रेटिक वैल्यूज और टेक्नोलॉजी का मिलना मानव कल्याण की गारंटी देता है। और भारत एक देश है जिसके पास टैलेंट भी है, डेमोक्रेसी भी है, मार्केट भी है। और ऐसी गोल्डन अपॉर्चुनिटी रेयर होती है जो आज भारत के पास उपलब्ध है।
Prime Minister wants to make sure ultimately AI is there to benefit the people of India.
This is India's moment. You have to seize the opportunity.
We are expanding our manufacturing capabilities in India.
We have already a large research-based center in India. We plan to grow that.
It's an exciting time.
He clearly wants to have India front and center in progress of technology.
Prime Minister is a very bright man.
जब हम ग्लोबल फ्यूचर की बात कर रहे हैं तो ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक अप्रोच सर्वप्रथम होनी चाहिए। सक्सेस ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटी लाइज इन आवर कलेक्टिव स्ट्रेंथ, नॉट इन द बैटलफील्ड। और वैश्विक शांति एवं विकास के लिए ग्लोबल संस्थाओं में रिफॉर्म्स आवश्यक है। रिफॉर्म इज द की टू रिलेवेंस। मैं जोर देकर कहूंगा कि ग्लोबल एक्शन मस्ट मैच ग्लोबल एम्बिशन।